In this Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree video, I'm going to be showing you my Carian Twinblade build. This is actually a light greatsword build, but it is using Rellana's Twinblade, which is kind of the namesake of the build. You get this weapon by defeating Rellana and by progressing the game. Rellana is the second major boss that has a remembrance in the game. I did not showcase this boss in earlier videos to avoid spoilers, but now that it's been a couple of days, I'm showing you this one. This is a fantastic weapon. So this is actually a paired weapon, and you deal physical, magic, and fire damage with strength, dexterity, and faith scaling. Kind of reminds me of the Sword of Night and Flame in some ways with its, damage types, etc. And it has moon and fire stance compared to night and flame stance. But obviously it's a paired weapon, and it's a light greatsword, which is one of the new weapon types. But it has basically a stance that you do with its weapon skill that allows you to do a fire attack or a magic attack. The magic attack shoots out waves, just like Rellana does during the boss fight, and the fire attack does like a circlish fire AoE around you and like rapid hits and then leaves fire on the ground. So you can pick which input you want to do. And one of the things I want to mention about this weapon is that it scales much better with strength and dexterity than it does intelligence and faith, even though they all say C. You're going to get more damage out of your melee attacks with strength and dexterity. However, intelligence affects the magic attack of the weapon skill, and faith affects the fire attack of the weapon skill. They do not impact each other, and strength and dexterity do not affect either of these at all. So you kind of have to have a balance of these, depending on how you use this weapon. And the weapon also has some interesting stat requirements with 13 strength, 16 dexterity, 16 and 16 faith. So your stats going to kind of be all over the place a little bit, which honestly isn't bad because this gives you flexibility to try out a lot of different weapons in the DLC. But what I've done with my stats here in order to get the most out of this weapon, what I found to be kind of like the sweet spot is I basically got strength and dexterity as high as I could get them with the amount of points I have at level 151 here. I have the minimum requirements for intelligence and for the sacred seal that I'm using. And I have 25 faith, so I can use Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength, which are, if you're going to have 16 faith, you might as well put a few more points in, make your fire attack a little bit stronger, and be able to use these incantations for, tough moments, boss battles, etc. And what's really crazy about this weapon, though, is that like at level 150, you can see how much room you have to grow in this weapon. You can probably go up to 50 strength, 50 dexterity, 30 or so intelligence, 30 or so faith before you like really start falling off probably damage-wise, which gives you like another 50 levels probably in this weapon alone. So your damage with this weapon is only going to get stronger. And you can get huge attack rating when you buff up fully with this weapon. So, it's just deadly. And the paired moveset of this is fantastic as well. The initial attacks are thrusts that are rather quick, in my opinion. They don't have as much AoE with this weapon as you might some other weapons. You still have some decent AoE, but you hit really quickly and you have a very long combo, which allows you to just dump your stamina into something that's like staggered or something like that, or stance broken, and do a lot of damage, or just go to town on an enemy that you keep interrupting with your attacks if maybe they have poor poise or something like that. So it works out really, really well, and the weight of it is 8. So, this is much lighter than actually using like 2 light greatswords. And then I have the Golden Order seal here. This scales with both intelligence and faith. I'm not really cranking these stats high, so I'm not really planning on using incantations, but because I was an astrologer, I only needed 1 more point in intelligence in order to use it, so I decided to do that. If you want to play this build as a hybrid where you're casting spells using this seal, you absolutely could if you want, but then you'd have to prioritize faith and intelligence and, kind of forego strength and dexterity in order to be able to spellcast effectively. You could also use like the Prince of Death staff or something like that, but that doesn't do that great in my opinion until much higher levels of stats. So I don't know if you want to do that early on or not. So I recommend if you want to use incantations at this level, switching your stats around using this sacred seal. But if you want to cast sorceries, use the Gelmor Glintstone staff at this level. And then, if you get your stats way higher, maybe you're like 250 or something, then you could switch over to Prince of Death. Armor-wise, I'm using Rellana's armor. I just love the cosplay with the swords. There's no reason not to do it. It looks awesome. It's sweet armor. It has good poise, has good protection, has 51 poise exactly. So that's exactly what you need in order to not have to use, the Bull Goat's Talisman. So that works out really, really well. That's why I have it here. But again, you can use any armor you want. If you're min-maxing, you'd probably go with something a little bit heavier. Talisman-wise, you can really go a few different directions. The thrusting attacks of this weapon with its R1 are great, but the Spear Talisman only affects physical damage, so I don't recommend using the Spear Talisman on this build. Shard of Alexander is going to affect both the fire weapon skill and the magic weapon skill, so definitely have that on this build. And then a new one is Rellana's Cameo, and essentially what this does is when you hold the stance button, which is like L2 for most of us, if you hold it for like a second, you'll see your character glow red, and then your next attack that you do out of that stance with like L1 or R1 or R2 will basically be increased by 20%. So it's really nice if you can predict that an attack is coming, but sometimes it's hard to get it off in very aggressive boss fights. But that stacks with Shard of Alexander, so that's going to boost the damage of your weapon skills if you can hold your stance for a little bit longer before firing it off. So that's why I have it here, because I don't always get it off, but a lot of times when I'm going for like the magic attack, for instance, it's got a little bit more range, and I can see an enemy coming, I'm just like waiting for them to get in range, I'll use that. I also have the two-headed turtle talisman here. This is kind of an upgrade of the turtle talisman, increases your stamina recovery even more, and one of the things about this build is it's a stamina hog. Combos are a lot of stamina, weapon skills are a lot of stamina, particularly the wave attack from the magic version. So you tend to run out of stamina very quickly, so this allows you to get it back. And you'll notice when I get to my stats, I actually have 30 endurance, just because I want to have enough stamina that I can use this build effectively. And then I have the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman for extra protection. Bosses hit like a truck, so you absolutely want to have some extra protection. If you want, though, depending on how good of a player you are, you could swap this out for something like Millicent's Prothesis or Rotten Wing Sword Insignia to boost up your attack power from rapid hits, which you do a lot with this build. So that's also one you could slot in here if you don't have a couple of these talismans. Either one of those are good in this build, too. And something that I want to mention is that, you know, when you're doing the magic attack with the weapon skill, if you connect with the blade and the projectile, you do way more damage than if you're at range. So ideally, you would do this point blank, and hopefully you could pull off the combo. It's not always possible. Sometimes you have to like start early, and then hopefully the last couple hits connect with it. But when you're hitting with the blade and the projectile simultaneously, you do a lot of damage, and that is the ideal situation. And when you're using the fire weapon skill, what I found is that when you finish the third spin or the third fire AoE comes out, you can start attacking even though the fire is still going. So try and attack out of that as quickly as you can, or start up another one if you can, in order to keep dealing damage while that fire continues to come out of the ground and burn. So attribute for this build, I have 50 Vigor, no surprise there. You need a good amount of health. This is the bare minimum I'd have for the DLC on any build. You can go higher, for sure. I have 30 Mind, simply because we tend to use a lot of FP with this build. We're using our weapon skills constantly, whether it's in a boss fight or out on the landscape. It is by far the best part of this weapon, so you definitely want to use those a lot. We also have Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength here, and those, particularly Golden Vow, is expensive. So you tend to go through FP quite a bit with this build. You could drop this down if you don't mind flasking more often, but I probably wouldn't go below 25. 30 Endurance is there again, not only for, you know, good protection on your armor and medium rolling, but also because this is a stamina hog. Having more stamina is good. Probably eventually you'll probably want to take this up to 40 and maybe replace your armor set with something even heavier for more protection, and that would give you even more stamina to play around with. I have Strength and Dexterity, you know, roughly the same here. Dexterity scales a little bit better than Strength, so you could just, you know, swap those numbers around, but they're pretty close. So I wanted to get a lot of damage out of my melee attacks. I do use my melee attacks too, and I'm not always using the weapon skill, so getting that physical damage up isn't bad. But as I mentioned earlier, if you want to hybrid more and spellcast, you're going to kind of just put the minimum in Strength and Dexterity and crank Intelligence and Faith, and use the Sacred Seal that I'm using or the Gelmor Glintstone Staff to cast Sorcery, something like that. And then you don't need any Arcane at all for this build, unless, you know, it's to meet a requirement for an incantation if you go the hybrid route, which I mentioned. So for Flask of Wonders Physique, there's a few ways you can go. Right now I have Magic Shrouding and Flame Shrouding in my Flask, so I can use either weapon skill and still get more damage when I'm buffed. Probably if you go into a boss fight, you're probably going to use one or the other depending on what the boss is doing and how much damage, you know, what they're resistant to. So that might not always be ideal, but when you don't know what you're facing, it's not a bad way to go. You could also replace one of those with a Thorny Crack tier to give you more damage with repeated attacks, or you could use a Stamina Recovery tier to get more stamina recovery. That helps a lot as well. All those are good options. Or you could go, you know, Intelligence Faith to get more damage with, you know, like let's say you're going with a magic attack for a build, you know, a fight. You could go Intelligence, Magic Shroud, and Crack tier or something like that. Or, you know, Fire and Faith. And if you're talking about what great rune to use. Godric's is ideal for this build, I think, because you have 7 of the 8 stats that you have significant investment in, and any investment into strength, dexterity, intelligence, and faith is going to benefit the build. All of them will, and obviously vigor, mind, endurance will all benefit. So if there was ever a weapon that benefited a lot from that rune, Godric's is a good one. Backup to that is probably like Radahn's for more FP and stamina. Those are really good, and extra health. So I think either of those 2 great runes will be fantastic for this build. So that wraps up our Carian Twinblade build. I hope you guys liked this one. This is a fantastic weapon. Really love this weapon so much. This is when I knew that I had to showcase in a build of some kind as soon as I got it. And I hope you guys are liking it. As always, if you have questions or other tips for other people, leave them in the comments below and I will try to answer them, or, at least people can get helped out as much as they can. How are you guys enjoying the DLC? Stay tuned. We have more Elden Ring content coming, more builds, more videos. We're going to be cranking it out over the next several months.